Hello, my friends. I'm Dr. Rodrigo Rodriguez, Medical Director of BioCare Hospital. And today, I'm bringing you a blog. I'm bringing you a podcast that's based on a lot of the things I hear on the street, that I see on the news, that I see everywhere. And you don't have to go too far to get a first-hand experience in what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about obesity. I mean, how long do you have to go to find someone with an overweight problem? If I told you rheumatism or Alzheimer's or cancer, you might have to think, oh, I think I know somebody, or I think I know somebody that knows somebody, or I read. Unfortunately, you have not been touched or been in contact with this type of diseases. But who doesn't know, or who is not a victim of overweight and obesity? And the question is, why is this happening? And I have made myself that question many times, because it was my generation of physicians that lived through the change. Not only lived through the change, but in many ways we were accomplices of the problem. We didn't know. We didn't know better. And we didn't challenge what was being told to us, not by the science world, but by politicians. And the worst part is the part that you have to bear. If you are overweight, you're going to be finger pointed. You're going to be treated as you're doing things wrong. You're going to be treated as a sinner because you don't have the willpower to do what you have to do, because you don't have the will to eat what you have to do, you don't have the will to reduce the amount of calories that you eat, and you don't have the will to exercise. So, who is to blame for the whole problem we're living through? You. You are the problem. You're lazy, you like gluttony, you don't do anything for yourself, and then when you try to do something, then you leave it alone only to regain the weight, etc. Sounds familiar? I'm sure it is very familiar for many of you. And you end up being all alone, being finger pointed, and feeling that you are a failure. You're thinking, I could do better. I know I can do better. I have accomplished so many things in my lifetime. I have done so many good things. I have met so many challenges. Why cannot handle my weight? And I have news for you. You are not the culprit. You are the victim. And I'm one of those doctors that's joining the whole movement to prove that we have all been lied to, and we all have been victims from an establishment that has misguided us, that misled us to believe things that are absolutely false. So sit down and relax. Make sure you share this message with people that you know. Make sure you talk to other people, because this is a movement that has started actually a long time ago. But it has to take momentum to change the status quo in which we live today. Because we're facing terrible things. We're facing a world obesity which is just around the corner. By 2030, 50% of the population will be overweight or obese. 50% out, 1 out of every 2. And nobody is going to stop it. Nobody is going to be able to control it. This is a tsunami of overweight that will affect us all. Not only us, but our children and future generations. What is what I'm talking about? Well, I'm going to tell you that me, as a doctor, has been in the front row of everything that has occurred. Because actually, the overweight obesity epidemics started around 1970s. Well, I graduated as a doctor in 1968. So I had my seat. I was at the front row to see everything and to get all the news that we got about weight and disease and so forth, and how we change the way we ate. Now let's face it, if you look at the curve, if you look at the statistics, up to 1970s, we were in fairly good shape. But from the 70s on, decade after decade, we were worse and worse and worse. And with obesity and with overweight, we saw a lot of health problems. We saw diabetes, we saw high blood pressure, we saw heart disease, we saw so many bad things happening to mankind that we were searching for answers. We wanted to do something. And the problem is that the answers didn't come from the scientific community, but mainly from politicians. The Select Committee of the Senate of the United States made a move to fight against the alarming number of heart disease, heart attacks. They were becoming very, very common. They were just getting more and more in numbers. So the US Senate decided after all, they were democratically elected, should decide what was the problem and design the answers to the problem. But you know about politicians, you know about lobbying, you know a lot of vested interests, etc., etc. So when the analysis came to review what was wrong with our food and our diet and our food supply, there was an easy conclusion. We have to look for a problem, but let's help these ones and let's help these other ones and so on. And then they chose fats as the villain. And fats were indeed vilified. Everything that was fat was bad. And if you're a doctor that graduated about those years, if you're a common folk that was alive and already conscientious, let's say in your teens or 20 years at that time, you can remember that all of a sudden the United States Senate decided to create the infamous food pyramid, in which they told us that fats we should eat very little. And fats are just in about every animal product there is on earth. Cholesterol was on eggs, fats were in milk, fats was in pork and beef, and you name it. Just about any of those foods was vilified. I remember distinctly when we were told as a doctor you should recommend your patients to eat no more than 2 eggs a week, or have the egg whites Don't take the yolk because it has a lot of cholesterol. But once again, all these deductions, all these guidelines came from a group of politicians. And then what happened is get rid of fats, and somehow there was a complete silence about sugar and flour. A complete silence. Nobody touched them. Nobody mentioned them. So that was very handy, because then the food industry had to start creating new foods, healthy, low fat, and when you reduce the calories and when you reduce the nutritional support of fats, you fill it with what? With sugar, with flour. And then if you see the pyramid, they told us we should eat cholesterol-free sugar, cholesterol-free flour, cereals, and then we started creating Frankenstein foods. I call them Frankenstein because they were elaborated, designed in a laboratory. They were not produced in the field, in the trees, in the ocean, in the prairie. No, they were designed and produced in a laboratory. And a guy with a white coat and a blackboard decided what to put in the food we were going to provide you from that day on. And we created a problem. We created a problem that we have lived with for many years, and that I, as a doctor, witnessed from the front row to see what would happen to people. And I saw degenerative disease bloom. I mean, go to staggering numbers, to be almost uncontrollable. Do you have any idea that in the world we diagnose a diabetic patient every 6 seconds? Just think of 1 hour, how many new cases of diabetes we have. And that is connected to the things we put in our mouth. Stay with me and share it. I'll be right back. You are with Dr. Rodrigo Rodriguez, Medical Director of BioCare Hospital. And today I'm talking about something that is critically important. It's the foundation of both our well-being or the culprit of all diseases that we're seeing today. And it is how in the world did we change the way we ate? Because of confusing rules and things, and somebody saying this, somebody saying the other, there's been a long time that as a doctor, I adopted what I call the 100-year rule. Somehow I knew, it was intuitive, that the way my parents ate, the way my grandparents ate, and so on, was a lot better than the way we were feeding ourselves in the 80s or 90s. And I saw, because I grew up in a household where a housewife was normal. I came from school and my mother would have cooked things, and she went to the market and she bought things, and she brought groceries and fruits and you name it. I went with her many times to the market, and I remember carrying my basket, because they didn't give you any bags in that time. That's another issue when we talk about plastics. But I remember that my mother would say, you have to put potatoes first, and then onions, and then this, and tomatoes go on the top, so they don't get damaged. But we bought food. Food that came from the field, food that came from a farm, food that came from the sea. It was food, real food. Today, I go to a supermarket and I see people's carts, and I panic. And the first question is, are we any different than those we were 100 years ago? No, we're the same body. We're the same metabolic condition. We use all our energy and nutritional supplies the same way. So our bodies have not really changed from 1970 to today. But the way we eat has dramatically changed. So how our bodies have coped with it? Well, the short answer is they haven't. We have not been able to cope with all those changes. We cannot handle the metabolic assault that has made us a victim, not a culprit, but a victim of overweight and obesity. And the worst part of it is that every time you go to the doctor, every time you talk to friends, everybody tells you, you know, you're not doing enough. You're not fighting enough. You are not putting anything on your side. You eat all the time. I have seen that you eat all the time. I have seen what you eat. And I have seen you sitting in a couch watching TV. You don't move. You don't do anything. You do not exercise. And one day you try. And one day you start a diet. And somebody tells you should eat this and that, and then you start making changes and reduce calories and so on. To no avail. Number one, probably in the first few days you're going to lose some weight, which usually comes from inflammation going down. You're losing water, not weight. And then all of a sudden, you either give up because you don't see results, or all of a sudden you just see that your weight starts to go up again. And you get discouraged, disappointed, you abandon the whole thing, and you feel worse. You feel the guilt. But my message is, this is not you. This is what they have done to us. And when I talk about the 100-year rule, I talk about go back to the foods your grandmother ate. They didn't have a foil. They didn't have an aluminum wrap. They didn't have a can. They didn't have a box. They didn't have any of those things. Just eat real food. Why? Because when the Select Committee for Nutritional Analysis, etc., decided that we should eat a lot less fat, leaving untouched the white, the pure, and the deadly sugar. They left it out, and they told us we should eat a lot more no-fat foods like cereals and that type of thing. The food industry thought, okay, this is fantastic. Now we can create foods that are going to be good and profitable. Because we know cereals have a very low cost. And sugar is also inexpensive. So what they decided is, if we're going to lower fat, we have to give people something to replace that. Because the flavor, the satisfaction, the satiety that fat foods produce is not met by rice, potatoes, or or cereals. So what you do, then you add sugar to the food. And if you read the labels of a lot of foods, you're going to see always sugar, some form of sweetener. Why? Because we like it. Our brains like it. Sweet flavor is good. No question about it. But that's not what is going to nourish our body. We used to have calories from beef, from fish, from whole milk, from whole organic. They didn't use the word organic because everything was organic foods. And they were in great shape. But now we had this laboratory designed food where you do use a cereal and put sugar in it, and then why don't we make it nice? Give it some color. Give it some flavor. Give it some something. But you can just put a little, 2 drops of this, 2 drops of that, and it's going to be green and red and beautiful, and it's going to taste fantastic because it's going to taste like watermelon or like lime, you name it. They were giving us very low nutritional food with a lot of rewards for our palate and for our brain. And we thought we were doing the right thing. I saw how kids were fed these box cereals, and people thought they were doing the right thing. And then we replaced butter, which is a fantastic, nourishing product. It's God made, period. I never argue with that, God. If God gave me butter, it has to be good, period. But margarine comes from a lab, from a factory. And they told us that was better. And the same thing happened with everything. It happened with eggs. Milk was reduced in fats. And they have made so many things to milk that to me is hard to explain. Every time I go to the supermarket and I see boxes of milk out of the refrigerator, I really wonder, what is this? See, I grew up in a different time probably, but don't tell me that that is better than. So with all these things, we started creating a real big problem. We started creating the beginning of the worst epidemic mankind has seen. And it is a man-made epidemic. This is not a bug that came from China. This is not something that was in the sewage or from rats. No, this is man-made. Not only man-made, but mind-designed, and we pay for it. So we pay a lot of money to have those foods within reach. And these foods started creating the bottom line problem, which is to every food, get this very clear, to every food you put in your mouth, there's a reaction in your body. And that response is hormonal. Every time we eat, we release hormones. The most important of them all, insulin. And we have to talk a little bit more about what insulin does. But keep in mind that whenever we eat, we start a chain reaction within our body of metabolic changes and reactions that are going to control the whole thing. How much we eat, how we're going to use that food, how useful it's going to be, etc. So there are a lot of things that happen every time we eat. And if we eat the wrong thing, we might get an abnormal hormonal reaction. And that is the problem. It's not your willpower. It's not your lack of interest. It's not, because that's the worst part of it all, that they have made us believe that obesity and overweight is a choice. No, we're victims of a food distortion that has turned us into a fat-making machine. So I want to go step by step so you can understand, number one, where it's coming from, and number two, which is the most important part, can I change the way everything is working? Can I shift my body to a better, healthier way without suffering? And most important, feeling better and functioning better, not miserable, as every time you attempt a diet. So stay with me, and once again, please share all this information. Let's start a movement. You are with Dr. Rodrigo Rodriguez, Medical Director of BioCare Hospital. And we're talking about obesity. And we're talking about how important a problem it is. From the epidemiological point of view, it's probably one of the most important issues that mankind is facing today. I mean, this is a real pandemic. A real pandemic that I don't think, if we don't really start today, we will be able to control, let alone stop. This is growing and coming upon us just like a tsunami. It is getting worse and worse and worse every single minute. Every single minute that goes by, we have new cases of diabetes, new cases of obesity, new cases of childhood obesity, new cases of degenerative disease. And remember that degenerative disease, these man-made diseases, are the ones that are going to kill the vast majority of us. Actually, 7 out of every 10 individuals are going to die from these diseases, from heart disease, from stroke, from Alzheimer's, from diabetes, from kidney disease, etc., etc., etc. That's what's killing humans. That's what's killing most of Americans. And the problem really begins with the way we eat. And it sounds simple, but it is very complicated. The ones that tried to make it sound very simple was the Senate of the United States and the medical world that sang along the same song. I'm going to give you the calorie story. It is very simple. It's utterly simplistic to say that we gain weight because we use less calories than the calories that we take in. In other words, this is just a number problem, very simple. Any accountant would solve it immediately. You have calories in, you have calories out. And that's a big lie. We were told that the weight problem is because of calories. Get it straight. It is not calories that count. It is where those calories are coming from. One example. I'll give you an ounce of sugar. And I'll give you an ounce of, well, it's not going to be an ounce, it's going to be less than an ounce of olive oil. I'm going to give you the same calorie amount of sugar and the same calorie amount of olive oil. The response is going to be very different if you put it in your mouth. Sugar is going to trigger a whole metabolic chain that begins with insulin release and other hormones in the body. It's going to trigger a lot of responses. But if you have the same amount of calories of olive oil, there's not any metabolic change. You go on with your life as if it's nothing. It's going to be used, distributed, and so forth without any hormonal response. So calories are not calories. So let's talk very clearly about calories. Number one, caloric intake is not the base of obesity. And number two, not all calories were created equal. If I give you the same amount of calories of fish and the same amount of calories of a sugar bar, the metabolic response is completely different. The enzymes, the hormones, the everything are going to be different. Worse, sugar has the ability to create desire for it. It is addictive. You never have fish and you say, oh, gee, I wish I could have a whole whale. It is so good. But what about a bucket of ice cream? You're going to go through a gallon in no time if they leave you alone. And it's good. I'm not saying it's not good. But we have to know better. And we have to understand that where calories are coming from makes a big difference. So number one is not just calories in, calories out, because not all calories are created equal. Second, when you say eat less calories, you assume that your body is spending 3,000 calories a day and you are eating 3,000 calories a day. You think that if you start eating 1,500 calories a day and you're spending 3,000 calories a day, you're going to be losing weight at the rate of the equivalent of 1,500 calories per day, right? This is my expenditure, and I reduce my calories in. Guess what? Our body is not dumb. Our bodies were created in perfection. Our bodies are here for survival. They're here for survival, period. If you decrease food, your body is going to decrease expenditure. Because that's going to guarantee that you're going to survive. Let's say you go through a famine, and then you're eating very few calories. If you reduce food, you're going to be able to survive longer and possibly past the famine. But if you keep on using the same amount of calories, you're going to be dead before food arrives. You're making $100,000 a year. You're having a good life. All of a sudden, because of whatever, your income drops to $25,000 a day. What you do? What would you do? What's smart to do? Continue traveling first class and going to Vegas and betting, etc., and buying expensive clothes? Or you start reducing things so your money can last longer until you can think of ways to recover your income. It's just common sense. And our body, once again, created imperfections, knows a lot better. So you reduce calorie intake, what happens is the body starts using less and less calories, and then it's becoming harder and harder to lose the weight. Sounds familiar? I'm sure many of you have lived through it. You start a diet, you're very successful, but all of a sudden, Nothing happens because your body is using less calories. Body temperature, metabolic rate, etc., everything comes down. So what in physics is completely true, calories in versus calories out give you your weight, it doesn't happen in the human body because you're going to fight that. Worse, if you start eating a little bit more, because your body has gone through a calorie reduction for a certain time, as soon as it gets a little bit more food, it's going to start saving calories. Sounds familiar? You go on a diet, you lose some weight, try to go to normal food, not even too much, but you try to eat a little bit better, and what happens, you recover that weight and pass the weight you had before. Sounds familiar? Because that time of lower calorie consumption produce metabolic changes that are going to make your body respond to whatever food it has to recover. Once again, those are survival mechanisms. Your body wants to recover the amount of food, the amount of fat it had, because it might need it again. If you went on a diet once, you might go on a diet again. The body doesn't know you're on a diet. For the body, this is famine. So stop thinking of calories. Don't count calories. That's the other big lie. And that also came out of that infamous resolution by the United States Senate. I mean, we had a United States Select Committee telling us what to eat and how our body should function. Well, sorry, our body doesn't work by decree. Doesn't obey the laws of the United States. Doesn't obey the laws of the land. Our bodies obey much higher laws. And if we understand them, we're going to be a lot better. So you can begin to see that it is not you who's failing. It is the system and everything they have told you, and that everything they have made you believe. So what are you going to do? We have to start thinking in a different way. We have to abandon all those things. And one last word about physical exercise. The same thing happens. If you start spending a lot of calories with exercise, there are also mechanisms that if you're eating less are going to limit the expenditure. If you're eating all right and you exercise, fantastic. But if you limit the food intake and then you exercise at the same time, that is not a good idea. That's not going to help you to achieve your goal. They have to be together. Good nutrition with exercise, because exercise demands energy. Exercise demands restructuring of muscle and bone and so forth continuously. If the body is not given the means, you might be losing muscle mass, not weight. So all this is very important to understand, because I want you to lose weight, but I want you to be healthy. And that's what we're going to keep on talking about. We're going to try to get to the culprit of the problem and start making up a plan that I plan to follow up in another blog. So stay with me and share the word. I'm Dr. Rodrigo Rodriguez, Medical Director of BioCare Hospital. And in today's podcast and blog, I'm talking about a very simple, unfortunately very frequent problem. making anybody that's overweight or obese, make that person believe that it is their fault, their choice to be fat. That we, the doctors, have the best advice and treatment for you. And you know, saying that brings me to another little problem. Apparently, when doctors don't have a pill for something, they don't know what to do. So if there is not a pill to lose weight, then all they can tell you is you have to eat less, you have to exercise more, you have to take care of yourself. They never tell you how. Because doctors don't waste their time, they don't waste their wisdom, they don't waste their scientific status in discussing apples and chard and potatoes or fish or eggs. No, they don't waste their time in that. They don't waste their time talking about grass-fed milk. They don't waste their time talking about organic food. They don't want to waste their time in talking about fish fats, for example. No. Every time you go to the doctor and you talk about food, they immediately wash their hands and they say, I don't know about that. I'll send you to the nutritionist. That's a lower type of healthcare practitioner. But me, the doctor that went so many years to university, the doctor that graduated cum laude, I'm not going to tell you what sort of rice you can cook. I'm not going to tell you to choose, for example, Minnesota wild rice versus the packed variety you can get at the supermarket. And I'm not going to explain you why one is better than the other. That's the truth. So what they do, when doctors cannot find a good answer to the things they tell you to do, then it's very simple. You can either blame it on the patient or blame it on the disease. So if you're obese, I'm going to blame you for being lazy and for overeating. If you're diabetic, I'm going to blame the disease, which is a progressive disease that probably was in your genes. So all I can do is give you drugs and medication to treat it. With obesity, we don't even have any drug. But we have discussed already very important issues about it. We have to learn about food. Doctors are the first ones that should learn a little bit more about food. The history behind the exploration of foods goes back to the 18th century. There are papers produced in the 1700s that talk about the influence of different foods on the human body. In the 19th century, we have also very important information. And at the dawn of the 20th century, there are books produced in how to deal, for example, with diabetes and with weight gain through food management. So the information has been there. And there have been many writers talking about it. Probably the most infamous, the better known is Dr. Atkins, Robert Atkins, that was working with all these type of theories and not only that, but proving that he could get excellent results by diet management. So all that has been there for us to read and for us to get the information. But Unfortunately, nobody seems to pay attention. So it's been very easy to blame the disease and to blame you for the medical failure that has really been all these problems. It's been a medical failure because we don't know what to do, we don't know how to do it, we don't know how to solve it. We see more and more patients, we see more and more frustrated people by trying, attempting to get better, and they cannot do it. So all we can do is blame you and blame the disease. I want to sit, relax, and think of everything I have said. Number one. Number two, I want you to think of all the questions and doubts that might be going around your head this very same minute. And write them down. And email me. Or send a message. Or Facebook, or Instagram, or Twitter, whatever you want. We are in all social media. And you can say, what about this? What about that? What about this food? How you cook this? Simple question, can I cook with olive oil? That's a question I get very frequently. And the answer is yes before we go anywhere else. Yes, you can cook with olive oil. You can fry with olive oil. And I can explain you why, but this is not the time to do it. But I'll be happy to answer any question. I'll be happy to talk to you if you want to. We have a toll-free number. Because I need you to start thinking out of the box. And out of the box says, don't count calories, think what you eat. Number one. Number two, exercise is good if your nourishment is good. You want to lose fat, not muscle mass. And with all these little things in mind, you can get started. Number one, you can be self-confident that you can do things. But you have to think that if we work against our metabolic well-being, where metabolism is stronger than will. It's not that you do not have willpower. It is that your metabolic demand goes in a different direction, and your metabolic demand is stronger than your will. So you have to start asking yourself all these questions, thinking about them, reading about them, and again, you can call me, you can contact me, and I will give you a good amount of reading material for your information. But I'll be very happy to guide you myself in solving all these problems. I'm the medical director of a hospital, of a full licensed hospital, that has not been shy to say, you know what, the medical director of the hospital is going to be in the kitchen 2-3 times a day because I want to see the salad dressing, because I want to see the food, because I want to see what they buy, because I want to see how we celebrate Thanksgiving in a healthy way. I'm the very proud director of a medical facility that not only is not shy, but it's proud to talk about food and proud to guide you through a lot better eating as a means to defeat disease. Not only obesity and so on, but also all sorts of degenerative disease. I invite you to go to the website. I invite you to check it out. I invite you to think of a health getaway. You know, I've been fighting all this off for so many years. I'm going to spend 10 days, 2 weeks at BioCare Hospital. It's going to be like a cruise. It's going to be an experience in which everything is going to be worked on, in which I'm going to reanalyze everything I do and start a pathway of health, shift to health. I'm tired of being sick. I'm tired of having low energy. I'm tired of being achy and painful. I'm tired of feeling guilty. I want somebody to tell me what's wrong, how can I change it, because if I understand it, if I can correct it, and I can get healthier, I'm going to enjoy it, and I'm going to be very happy to know that I am not the problem, that the problem has been brought to me. This is like a drug addiction. People are pushed into drugs, and then we finger point them, when it is the whole environment that pushed them into drugs. Well, we're being pushed into sugar, into low fat, into a lot of big mistakes in our food. So if we can change all that, then we're going to nourish our body, we're going to be able and happy to exercise, we're not going to be pushed, we're going to have the energy, the drive to move more, and we're going to accomplish the well-being and the health that we all cherish and we all look for. So the next step is contact me, contact BioCare, follow me, check this out, because you know what? I'm already thinking that my next podcast is going to be about specific things you can start doing right now. I'm talking about sugar, I'm talking about diet, I'm talking about this thing, I'm talking about different way of eating. Why don't you tell me, doctor? Why don't you start telling me what to do? And I'll be very happy to tell you. And I'll be very happy if I can inspire you to do things different. It's all a matter of inspiration. You're not watching this podcast by a chance. It might be your lucky day. So follow me, stay with me. There are a lot more things to talk about. Till next time.